Hello, my name is Sumner, and I did my final presentation on the current public access issues and lawsuit going on in the Crazy Mountains. I was lucky enough to speak with Alex Sienkiewicz, who is the current Yellowstone District Ranger for that area.
Essentially, it's a body of law that probably goes back to, English law or perhaps Roman law. So it's not new, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it just says that essentially a legal right to cross a certain piece of land can be established by continued use of that land. And so prescriptive easements, that's a whole body of law, isn't just about getting to public land. Certainly, a private landowner could claim a prescriptive easement over another private landowner to get to his or her private property. And it's essentially state law. It varies a little bit from state to state, but it says that a court can confer a prescriptive easement in favor of a party if they can prove open, notorious, continuous, and uninterrupted use for the statutory period, which in Montana is 5 years. What should land managers do in this situation? What should the public do in these situations? And what should landowners do where there's been, where there's a 100-year-old trail that crosses private land and not a lot of records? And it's a very common situation in Montana. And so, I would hope, as a citizen and as a public servant, that sort of the powers that be don't simply sort of fight over it and argue about it, but actually consider it a public policy problem and address it at a much higher level. So people on the ground aren't left, just to sort of, essentially hung out to dry with an unclear situation. I've been the district ranger here for almost 11 years, and I've seen a lot of barriers go up even before there was a whole lot of talk and debate about the Crazy Mountains. So it's a trend out on the landscape to where public access points are diminishing in number. And, one could argue that is privatization at play. One could argue that that's unfair. Some might argue that it is fair, that they're exercising their private property rights. And so I think there's a tension in society about that right now in the West. And at the same time, public lands are just dramatically rising in popularity and use rates, which, I would argue there's some benefit to that. You have a guy like me who's just a local public land manager, district ranger, embroiled in this conflict over the crazies. But, in my mind, that only happens when, sort of legislative bodies and elected officials are not addressing the problem or the issue. And so anyway, my hope is that, you have people of great influence, whether they're elected officials or legislators, addressing the issue and sort of helping solve these problems in a way that's fair to everyone in society. I do think that the trend that I mentioned about sort of losing access, it's all anecdote, although for me in this area, I've observed these barriers go up, and I could name trails, but inevitably it's on one of these sort of gray trails, like legally gray, where it's been on the map forever and people have used it, but a landowner discovers there's no easement and they put up a gate, and you know, so anyway, I think that we all as a agency and as public land users need sort of more clear policy guidance law about how to deal with those situations, unless we just want to just see decades of lawsuits, which, you know, lawsuits are one way to solve a problem, but they're not necessarily the best way.
As Mr. Sienkiewicz stated, there is currently a need for policy addressing access issues that involve contentious prescriptive easements. This is an area that requires more attention from both local and state policymakers, as providing guidance to private landowners, the public, and the managers of our public lands will help to clear up the issue and allow us all to move forward. Until this can be addressed in policy, I agree with Alex that communication between parties should always be the first step in dealing with any matters that may arise. Respectful discussion is certainly a tool that can be used by both landowners and the public to prevent any future issues regarding access to our public lands.
You know, whether it's the government or an environmental group or a private property owner, you know, we just all need to never forget that our best capacity to solve problems is like, you know, in the cafe over a cup of coffee.